The East Coast is already feeling the immediate effects of the Colonial Pipeline shutdown following a ransomware attack by hackers. Many are actually right now trying to panic buy gas. Some are even hoarding gasoline out of fear that they won't have access to it very soon. And unfortunately, that's leading to a situation where others who haven't been able to purchase gas yet are coming across pumps that are out. And so if you live in Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia, it's likely you're experiencing this firsthand, and it's absolutely devastating. For their role, Colonial Pipeline is planning on getting back up and operating again within the week, although that was a very vague timeline, and we don't really have any certainty about when this pipeline, which is one of the country's largest, will be functioning again. Now, one woman in South Carolina, a resident, said, "It was unbelievable. When I was driving today, I thought it was a catastrophe coming. I've seen all these cars waiting and I was like, oh my God, I have to fill my tank up." And so the Biden administration is trying to urge people to not panic buy and to avoid hoarding gas. But of course, people aren't really listening because the panic has already set in. The 5,500-mile pipeline delivers roughly 45% of the fuels used on the East Coast. So with that in mind, you can understand why this is such a devastating cyber attack. And if you're curious about how this happened, you can check out our initial video on this. When the story first broke, we gave you all the details on that. But as I mentioned, the Biden administration is now saying, please stop hoarding the gas. The US Energy Secretary urged motorists not to panic buy fuel. Instead, officials are considering moving supply by train or ship if necessary. Also, just to give you a sense of how much this is impacting states in the South was in fact hit the hardest. Late Monday, almost 6.5% of gas stations in Virginia were out of fuel, according to travel app GasBuddy. It said more than 1% of stations in North Carolina and Florida had no gas. And remember, that was on Monday. We're now dealing with the same situation on Wednesday, so it's very likely that people are experiencing, a lack of gas at stations in these particular states. Governors from North Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia have declared a state of emergency. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper suspended some regulations to make sure the state has enough fuel. Meanwhile, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp suspended the gas tax. So I want to go to this video that kind of gives you a sense of how people are feeling on the ground in these states, what they're experiencing, and just how catastrophic this incident really is. And then we'll talk about why this happened. Take a look.
We got a call from family that said you better fuel up before you hit Tennessee.
The Secretary of Energy urged people not to panic buy fuel and said they are considering moving supply by train or ship if necessary.
We're asking people not to hoard and know that we are all over this.
The ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, carried out by the Russian criminal hacking group DarkSide, is having the kind of impact many analysts predicted.
This is a massive pipeline, and without it, we're quickly realizing what can happen. Fuel is starting to run out.
The 5,500-mile pipeline supplies 40% of the East Coast fuel. Shortages are now being reported in 7 states, including Georgia, where the governor suspended the gasoline tax.
It'll probably help level the price at the pump off for a little while.
Airlines are also feeling it. American forced to add refueling stops for 2 of its long-haul flights. And while Colonial Pipeline says that it expects to be up and running by the end of the week, the Biden administration is under pressure to make sure it doesn't happen again.
But this is a stark example of how these cyber attacks can have real demonstrable impacts on our economy and our national security.
Oh, it's fascinating to hear a Republican lawmaker talk about these cyber attacks and how threatening they are to our national security, to our economy. I agree. The only problem is, for those who want Biden to do something, what exactly are they expecting him to do? Are they expecting regulation? Because the fact of the matter is, Colonial Pipeline is a privately held company. It's privately held by some foreign actors, certainly the Koch brothers. And so are we calling on regulating this private company to ensure that they're actually spending the necessary resources to bulk up their cybersecurity? Because a private company has one goal and one goal only, and that's to maximize their profits and to lower their costs. So are they going to take necessary actions to prevent something that could happen in the future? Or are they gonna save that money in order to return more to their shareholders, to beef up their executive pay? That's the question we need to be asking right now. Because again, a Republican lawmaker in that video specifically said, we need to, this is serious, this is very serious, but this is a private company. So let's talk about what we've experienced historically with private companies and their unwillingness to spend the necessary resources to bulk up their security, certainly their cybersecurity. There was an interesting article written years ago in Issues in Science and Technology that I think perfectly applies to what we're experiencing today. Businesses have not displayed a strong commitment to cybersecurity, to put it mildly. Many corporate leaders and the think tanks they're associated with, the corporate world, maintain one version or another of a libertarian or conservative laissez-faire approach, basically holding that they are the best, or they are best left alone, not regulated, free to follow their own courses. They further hold that their main duty is to their shareholders who own the corporations and not to the common good. That's how private companies operate, folks. So when you have a pipeline that provides fuel to 45% of people in the East Coast, or 45% of the fuel to the East Coast, I should say, obviously that's an important pipeline, right? Obviously that's a pipeline that you'd want to secure. But if you've got a private company, the only way you can ensure that they take the appropriate measures is if you regulate them. And there's no conversation about that. This is not a government entity. This is a private corporation. They want to maximize profits. They're not going to do the right thing out of the goodness of their hearts. There's no morality here. Morality doesn't weigh in to their decisions here. Profits do. Which is why these types of situations happen all the time. We just experienced it in Texas with their privatized electric grid. Well, let me give you more. The effects of industrial espionage are often not in evidence for several years, beyond the horizons of many CEOs who are concerned primarily with the short-term profits and stock prices of their corporations. I need you guys to understand this. This is how it works. This is how the system works. It's not broken. This is how the system works. They're not going to take the appropriate measures to protect themselves from any hacker, from any ransomware. They're not gonna do it because that would require them to invest in the company. And the only investment that we've been seeing from private corporations lately is in the form of corporate stock buybacks to further enrich themselves and increase their profits through artificially inflating the price of their stock. That's what they do. That's their way of investing in their companies. Let me give you more. Governments that seek to address private sector cyber vulnerabilities face serious pushback against onerous regulations and reservations about creating a moral hazard if they assume responsibility for protecting the private sector. These reasons and others have made a government solution to this worsening private sector predicament unsatisfactory, a situation that is unlikely to fundamentally change for the foreseeable future. Buckle up, folks. Buckle up. There's gonna be more and more of this. And so, has there been an example of the federal government using regulation as an effective tool to protect people? Yeah. In fact, when it comes to credit cards, something really fascinating happened in the 1970s that I'd love to share with you. The credit card system is often cited as an example where incentives are correctly aligned, dating from the 1970s when the government placed limitations on consumer liability for fraudulent charges. This change in liability motivated the industry to develop needed security measures. So once you shift the costs from the consumers, from ordinary Americans, to the corporate executives, then all of a sudden it looks like they have an incentive. Oh, maybe we need to beef up our security to prevent fraud. Because previously, before this, if you were the victim of fraud as an ordinary American, oh, then you got to deal with it. But once there were regulations indicating that the credit card issuer would have to deal with it, well, they have an incentive to beef up their security. They want to prevent fraud because they don't want to have to pay. What we're experiencing right now is not the bug, it is the feature. This is how it works. And we got to be real about that. When it comes to certain parts of society that we need for security, for safety, for sustenance, for shelter, for healthcare, all of those things that are so important to our survival, we really have to question, does it make sense for these services, for these things to be provided to us by private corporations that have one goal and one goal only: maximize profits? So while Republicans claim that this is awful, we got to do something about this, I think we need to ask that follow-up question. Okay, great. What do you propose we do? Do you propose that the federal government take public resources and just shift it over to private companies so they don't have to pay for security, so the US taxpayer pays for security on their behalf? Because if that's what they're proposing, they can go ahead and F off. But if they're proposing regulation, then I'm interested in having a conversation. Then we should maybe take a little listen to what they have to say. But my guess is they're not interested in that.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.